Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the Econobox garage. An order of parts came in, so now I'm able to finish up the front suspension. I can get the front springs installed, and also I'm going to finish off the gearbox so it's ready to reinstall on the back of the engine. Thanks for joining me. I hope you enjoy this week's video. Well, to start off this week, I've got my parts order in that I was waiting for, and in that order were the new bump stops for the front suspension. That's the old one, and these are the new ones. They look a little beefier, but I did check, and they are both the same height. The reason I'm replacing them is I only have one of these. I either misplaced the other one, or it wasn't on the car in the first place. So I'm going to put that one aside and get these ones installed. Once they're in, then I can install the front springs and the front suspension will be done. In order to make these a little easier to install, I'm just going to put some silicone lube on this part here where it goes through the hole in the chassis, and it'll make things a little more slippery and easier, and theoretically easier to get in. Okay, that's that one on. You now can see I've got the bump stop in place, and next up I'm going to install the spring. I'm going to use the long bolt method to put the springs in, so I'm going to remove this piece here and replace the 4 short bolts with the long bolts that I used to take them out. Well, I have the spring seat out, and as you can see it's got a big scratch on it. And I'm assuming that's from taking a spring out without removing this. So before I put this all back together, I'm going to clean this up. I'll give that a shot of paint to help prevent any future rust. Now while I'm waiting for the paint to dry on that spring seat there, I'll go and put the bump stop on the driver's side and drop this spring seat as well. Okay, I have the driver's side done for as far as getting the pan off, the spring pan off and the bump stop back in. This paint has had a chance to dry. And then here's the long bolts I was talking about. So what's going to happen with these, I'll just take that one off, just show you here. Is we'll put all 4 of these on through here. This will go up on here with the spring on top of it. And we'll slowly tighten that up, which will compress the spring into place. And then once we've got it up there, I'll remove one of these long bolts at a time and replace it with the short ones. I can see now I've got the spring sitting here. I have the spring plate and I have the long bolts. So the idea now is just to tighten these bolts up. That will compress the spring into place. And then once it's up into place, I'll remove one of these bolts at a time and replace it with the short one. Well, now that I've got these bolts, or the long bolts, all cinched up to the bottom so that spring plate is tight to the A-arm, spring is nicely compressed in place. So I'll pull one of the long bolts out, replace it with a short bolt, repeat that 3 more times, and that side is done. And then I can just repeat it over on the driver's side. Alright, so now we have the spring in with the short bolts from the underside. Those are all tightened up. You see how this bump stop here is compressed compared to the one on this side. So it gives you an idea of the force being exerted by those springs. Now I must say you need to be really careful when working with springs and trying to compress them and that. This is one way of doing it. And from what I've seen, it's probably one of the safest ways to do it with the long bolts. I've seen it done just using 2, but I prefer to err on the side of safety and use 4 long bolts to do this job. So that is the right hand side of the car done. I'll get to work on the left hand side, and then I think we can call the front suspension done. As I mentioned earlier in the video, my order of parts came in, and one of those parts is the bushing for the shift fork. Now the method I use to get those bushings out is I find a socket that is big enough that the bushing can go in. So that one goes in there quite nicely. And then I need a socket that is the same size or slightly smaller than the bushing itself. So that one looks like it's going to work just fine. So basically what I do is I will put the fork over the socket, the receiving socket we'll call it, and then I'll take the other socket and use the hammer and tap the old one out. To put this bushing in, I'm just going to grab a bit of oil and put it on. And then I'm going to get it into the vise here. Let's do it that way so you can see it. And then by doing it in the vise, I know it's going to be going in square. Okay, so let's just let's get it more into the middle. There we go. And there we have the new bushing in place. Now that I have the bushing replaced in the clutch fork, I can get that installed in the gearbox. That in turn will allow me to put on the throw bearing, put in the cap that seals up the hole here, and hook everything up to the slave cylinder. So there we have the dust boot on, a new cotter pin in the clevis for the slave cylinder. Now on the inside, a new throwout bearing and new clips to hold that throwout bearing onto the clutch fork. So with those last little bits installed, the gearbox is all ready to reattach to the engine. Now that's all I have time for this episode. If you enjoyed the video, please be sure to share it with your friends. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and don't forget that little bell icon so you'll get notified when the next video comes out. My name is Ian. This is the Econobox Garage. We'll see you next time.